Welcome to the Live Life Well podcast for busy women with me, Joanne Bibby. I hope this is a place where you'll find encouragement, inspiration and community to live life well, body, mind and soul. Well, welcome to the Live Life Well podcast for busy women, and I'm really excited to chat to our guest this evening, and I just hope this is a chance for you to take some time for you out of your busy schedule and just think about how you can take care of yourself to do all the amazing things that you're called to do. So tonight I'm really excited to have Sara-Jane Ladums on with us, who is a health and productivity coach and is really passionate about supporting busy mums to feel more confident and to get back their energy and their time, which I'm all about. I love that. So Sara-Jane, you want to introduce yourself and just tell us a bit about you and why you're passionate about supporting busy women and mums to feel great.
Well, thank you so much for having me on your show. I'm very excited and honoured to be here with a fellow podcaster. So I'm Sarah-Jane, most people call me SJ, and I am a former secondary school teacher. So that's where sort of my journey began in the world of health and fitness, because as a teacher, I was extremely stressed out. I had way too much to do, way too much marking and lesson planning. And the way that I coped with the stress and the anxiety of teaching was exercise. And this was before I had my daughter, I was very into exercise. I spent a lot of time cycling, running, competing in some really long distance rides, like cycle rides, like 100-milers at the weekends, just for fun, as you do. But that was how I sort of coped with stress. And then when I had my daughter, as many of us women know, life does a complete turn and life looks very, very different. And the time that you used to have to do the things that you wanted to do, so for me, the training and the hours that I used to put into to go cycling and running and that sort of thing for the events, I didn't have it anymore. So I had to get quite a lot smarter with my time as a mum, so that I could still make time for looking after myself, prioritizing like my health, my fitness, but also making sure that I'm still present and around for my daughter. And I think my background as a teacher, I'd learned an awful lot of skills to help me in that process of organization. And I think sometimes when God gives us a gift, we don't always realize that we have a gift until actually somebody turns around and says, oh my goodness, like you're so organized. How do you do that? And it was those kind of conversations that then prompted me to think, okay, so how do I do this? What do I do? And how can I share it with other people?
Oh, amazing. And if you got any tips about being organised, then hit us with them, because I'm many things, but organised is not one of them, I would say. So I love that you've been able to use your gifts and skills to help other mums and other busy women, which is amazing. So obviously fitness is really important to you. Cheering other women on is really important to you. But if I asked you, what does living life well mean to you? How would you answer that?
Oh, that's a good question, isn't it? So living life well, I think it really depends on your figuring out what your priorities are. And I think that's one of the most important things is what is important to you? Why is it important to you? And then how do you make your life look so that you have those things, those priorities showing up in your day, in your week, in your month, in your year? Because those are the things, if you have a really clear idea of what is important to you, then you can start to find the time within your busy schedule to make sure that you are allowing time for those things. So in terms of living life well, that's what I think is important. And I think for many of the women probably listening to you, one of the most important things for them is showing up to be a good mum. And that involves all of the things that we do as mums in terms of, looking after the home, making sure the kids have got everything that they need. I mean, like my daughter tomorrow has got a disco and she's got to wear a bird costume for her disco. And, I've had to, within my busy schedule, find the time to figure out what it is she's going to wear. So it's prioritization and making sure that you're doing the things and the things that you want to be doing as well as the things that you have to be doing as well.
Yeah, and that's such a good question to ask ourselves. Like, do our lives reflect the things that are really important to us? Because we can think they do, but then sometimes it's about taking a step back. But oh my goodness, how stressful is it dealing with school and like keeping up to track with things like school emails and the panic, the sheer panic at thinking you've forgotten about like World Book Day or something. It's just
Yeah.
absolute terror, isn't it?
Yeah. A disco with a bird costume.
Wow.
That's quite a new one. Yeah.
Wow. And it's great that you've been able to sort of establish what your priorities are. Do you have any advice for mums that maybe have just forgotten about themselves, just forgotten like what is important to them? How do we even take that step back to figure out what's important, let alone make sure our lives are reflecting that?
I think as mums, if you find yourself thinking, oh my gosh, I've got so much on my plate, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling stressed out, and you are perhaps lacking energy. And I think one of the classic ones that's always a really good indicator that you might be not looking after yourself enough is that 3 o'clock in the afternoon slump, where all you want to do is just sit down and eat a massive bar of chocolate or something like that because you're so tired and you're looking to find some energy and some fuel from the sugar. And that can be a really, really good indicator that perhaps you need to look and take a step back and look at your own self-care and think about how you can prioritize that and fit that into your daily routine.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good telltale sign, isn't it? That if we're getting to that point in the day and really struggling and reaching for the sugary snacks, and there's probably something behind that going on, like either we're not getting enough sleep or drinking enough water or getting enough rest. And that's a really good self-check-in, actually. That's a good point. And sort of going back to your kind of story about you realizing that sort of link between taking care of yourself and how that made you feel, like realizing that exercise was a really good coping strategy to help you manage the stress. Was that sort of where your passion for well-being kind of started with, sort of seeing that link, that not thinking of exercise for exercise sake to like manage our weight or to be fitter, but just that actual benefit for our mental health as well? Is that where that sort of started with you, and what have you kind of learned along the way from that you sort of want to pass on to other people now that you work with?
I think, to be completely honest with you, I've always been quite lucky because sport has always been a really big part of my life, even from a really young age. So I was the kid that was playing netball, playing hockey, in all the after school clubs, playing. And then when I went to university, I was playing for the university netball teams and that sort of thing. I think the real understanding of the importance of it actually came after I had my daughter. So my daughter's 5.5 now. And it was when I couldn't do the things that I was used to doing. And I think perhaps, I mean, even through the whole of my pregnancy, because I had been so active prior to getting pregnant, I was still in the gym. I made an awful lot of some of the instructors worry about me on many occasions because I was still in the spin class, doing a spin class in the swimming pool. And that was fine because my body was used to it. But it wasn't until those last few weeks of pregnancy where you can barely move and then the postpartum of not being able to exercise, not being able to move, for physical reasons, but also because you've got a small baby that you're looking after so much. That was the point, I think, for me, where I realized how important exercise was for my own well-being, not physically, like you were saying, and not so much about like the physical side of it of, I've got to be a certain size. Because in full transparency, that isn't something that I've sort of struggled with, but it was the mental well-being. And actually, I personally struggled quite a lot with postnatal depression because I wasn't able to be as active after I'd had my daughter that I had been before. And that massively impacted my mental health. And I knew that if I was struggling with that sort of thing, I knew other people would be as well. But it's not a conversation that, and I think it's great that we've got podcasts like yours, because we need to have these conversations, and we need to have these conversations in a safe place. Because I don't know about you, but I went to some mum and baby classes, which were lovely, but nobody sort of really was very honest about how hard it was. And I would often sit in those rooms and hear other people saying that their babies went to sleep and their babies were amazing and well behaved. And I was thinking, my life's not like that. But I just don't think people are honest enough to have these conversations about their well-being, which is why these kind of podcasts are so important. But yeah, the understanding of the importance of fitness from a mental health perspective actually came after I had my daughter.
Yeah, and it's so funny, isn't it? When before we have our babies and we're pregnant, we think, "Oh, life will carry on. I'll be able to keep doing all these things. I'll just strap this baby to my hip and I'll just carry on." But there's almost like a grief, isn't there? I think when we realise what we are kind of sacrificing, even though we've gained something amazing and precious, there's a lot you do have to sacrifice or lay down for a little while, and that can have a massive impact. We kind of lose ourselves a bit, don't we? And you're right that sometimes we don't appreciate the things we can do and the freedom we have until that's taken away for whatever reason, through ill health or pregnancy or changes of circumstances. So you're so right. And but then there is hope. Our little ones get bigger and like a bit more independent, and we can sort of get these things back. Maybe it won't look quite the same, but you're so right as well about having honest conversations. And your podcast is amazing too. Like, I really recommend that. But I think we're getting a bit better. I remember those baby groups, and they were stressful. It was all about like, oh, whose baby's taking their first steps first and who's speaking first, and it was like a competition. And like, that's not what you need when you're exhausted and depressed, is it really? So yes, definitely been there.
I always
So
found it was the mums that were a little bit ahead of me, who had 3-4-year-olds, who would actually be really honest with me and who were actually the most helpful. And they'd be like, it does get better. It's okay. And yes, it's all right to feel like a crazy person right now. It's normal.
that's what you need to hear, isn't it? And that's what we need to remember to say to other new mums, for sure. Like, be real, but give a bit of hope that it does get a bit easier. So you talked about how important fitness is to you in terms of your mental health and your well-being. What are your other habits or your sort of pillars of well-being that are really important for you to help you keep well?
So, the main thing that I'm extremely passionate about is women understanding what is going on with their body in terms of their hormones. So, people you listening, you might have heard of something called cycle syncing. I am really passionate and really talk quite a lot on my own podcast about cycle syncing, because I don't know about you, but the way that I learned about my body when I was younger and I was learning about periods, it didn't come from a woman, it came from a science textbook in the classroom. And I think it's really important for us as women to really understand that our bodies are so massively different from men's. And once we have that knowledge and that better understanding of our hormones, why some days we feel okay and then other days it's a struggle to get out of bed. Like, men don't have that because their hormones are constant. Whereas if you look at our hormones, it's like some kind of crazy roller coaster every month, isn't it? And I think that's why I'm so passionate about talking around cycle syncing, because once you have that knowledge, it really does open your eyes to why you feel a certain way, why your body feels and does things a certain way, and it can really empower you and make you feel better about yourself with that knowledge. So that is my real pillar, is that knowledge and understanding of what's going on with your hormones.
Oh, yes, I'm so glad you brought this up, because I was dying to pick your brain about this, because it's something that I'm so fascinated in, but I'm only sort of starting to learn about. And it was listening to your podcast really that gave me words for it. You know, I'd been thinking about it. I'd been thinking, you know, this is interesting. There's something around sort of self-compassion for women to understand their bodies better and their rhythms, and times of the month where it's easier to get up and be full of energy and get things done. And other times of the month, maybe it's about having grace and being gentle on ourselves and resting more, and also being assertive in like what we need at those times. So Sarah-Jane, like, please hit us with like what you know that you can tell us in 15 minutes. Like, what are the sort of rhythms that we can expect? Obviously, everyone's slightly different, aren't they? But how do you manage that, and how do you sort of learn to read your body and know what it needs at different times of the month?
Mm. I think the most important thing that you can do when you're thinking about getting an understanding of your hormones is to track and monitor what your body is doing. Because exactly as you said, everybody is different, and no one woman's cycle is going to look the same as another. So I really suggest that the first step, if you're thinking about trying to get a better understanding of your hormones, is to track. And you can do that really simply. You could do like with a paper and pen, with a diary. There are so many apps that you can use. If you have, so I am an iPhone girl, so I don't know about Android, but on my iPhone, there is actually within the health section a whole area where you can track your cycle. There are some very clever apps that have the option for you to get really quite detailed about the different symptoms on different days. And I really recommend that you spend maybe 3 months tracking and just seeing what is normal for you. And that's going to open up a door to you really understanding what is going on with your body. And the more information, these apps are very clever as well, the more information that you put into them, the more accurate they get. And I think when I work with women, I always say the first thing you need to do is track your cycle for 3 months. Now, I know there might be people listening who perhaps don't have a cycle because they use contraception, or perhaps they might be perimenopause or menopausal as well. But you can still use, and I'll dig into the principles behind cycle syncing, you can still use these principles, because I think it's too important to remember, and those of you that do have a faith like we do, like God rested on the seventh day. And I think it's important for us to understand that we as women who are doing all of the things need to give ourselves permission to rest. So even if you aren't somebody who has a cycle because you're using contraception, or maybe you're through the menopause, you can still use the principles of cycle syncing, because the great thing about this is the science behind cycle syncing is telling you that you need to slow down at certain points. And that's one of the things I think is incredibly freeing for women when they get a better understanding of it.
Yes, that is so good. I'm very passionate about rest, and it's so beautiful that a God who we perceive as male gave us as women permission to slow down and rest and take care of ourselves, because he knew the demands that would be on us in our busy lives. So I think that's really a really beautiful picture, and that's a great idea to track it over 3 months, because that will give you a good average. So I guess 1 month there are going to be anomalies and different things going on in your life, but just to get an idea, I do use the Apple app that you mentioned, but only just to track my period. But I need to be more detailed, don't I, about my mood, my energy, and just noticing the patterns, isn't it? And then from that'll give you an idea of what you need to want it at certain times. Is there, although we're all different, is there any sort of general principles in terms of maybe like the week before your period? Is that a time to sort of slow down and be gentle, or like the first few days? Are there any sort of general guidelines that you could share?
Yeah, so I always liken to the phases in your cycle. So there are 4 main phases in your cycle. And I actually live with a farmer. We live on a farm. And I liken the phases in our cycle to seasons. And I think it really helps us to understand when we talk about the phases in the cycle as seasons, because if you think about what that looks like, how you feel at different times throughout the year, it helps you to get a better understanding of how you might be feeling. So many people start the cycle with the menstrual phase, but I'm going to talk about the cycle from the follicular phase, which is the first day after you finish your period. And I talk about that being as like spring. So if you think about like what spring is like when we're in February as we're recording this, and we're all like anticipating those first like moments of spring where the bluebells come up and the snow drops, and you can start to see and feel like life is emerging and things are growing. And that's really a good way to think about probably what's going on in your body, because at that point your hormones are starting to change and starting to rise, and what you'll notice is that you'll start to feel potentially more energized, and you're maybe going to go out and be doing a bit more. You're going to want to maybe be sort of spending more time like doing things that require a bit more energy, and you're probably going to have that energy. Now, the next phase in the cycle, and I am really giving like such a like tip of the iceberg overview with this. So I'm going to caveat that here. So the second phase we talk about is the ovulatory phase. And this is again the point where your hormones are high. I'm sure many women, if you have had like problems with fertility, you've really been looking for that ovulatory window, because that's when your body's going to be ready to potentially have a pregnancy. And that's the point where your estrogen levels are high, you're going to be at your most energetic, you're going to want to be out there being sociable, talking to people. And if you think about it, sort of from a very sort of basic human nature sort of side of things, that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Because your body is like, hey, look, I'm ready. I'm in the right place to get pregnant. Let's go out and talk to lots of people. It's not going to want you to be like tucked away under a blanket. And I liken that phase to summertime. And particularly for us Brits, when summer comes, like everyone's like on the beach, doing barbecues, like the shirts are off, the bikinis are on, even if it's only like 20 degrees, we are having summer. And that's sort of like quite a good way to liken how you're likely to feel at that point in your cycle. Now, these phases and these different points in your cycle, they can change in terms of length depending on you as an individual, which is why you need to be looking and why you need to be tracking. Because when you start to notice these changes in your energy levels, it's going to help you to get a better understanding of how long or short each phase of your cycle is. So I'm not going to sit here and say, well, your follicular phase should be this many days and your ovulatory phase is this many days, because it really does vary from so many women. And also it will vary as you age. So as you get closer to menopause and your hormones are dropping, you're going to notice that the stages in your cycle change as well. And that's why it's so key to know what's going on in your body and to be able to understand the principles of cycle syncing. Because as you start to get older and as your bodies and your hormones are changing, you're potentially going to go through, we're all going to go through menopause, you can start to look out for those signs because you're going to notice those changes. So after the summer, the ovulatory phase, we then move into what I call autumn, which is your luteal phase. And this is where the other main hormone in our body kicks in, which is progesterone. So this is a point in your cycle where your body's actually doing quite a lot of work, which is why we can often feel tired, because our body is working to prepare ourselves potentially for that fertilized egg to implant and grow a pregnancy. So there's an awful lot that it's doing. It's growing, a nice thick lining in the womb. The hormone progesterone naturally does make us sort of slow down and feel a little bit more tired and a little bit more sleepy. And this is the point in your cycle where some of the symptoms you might notice is that maybe you get cravings for things, or maybe you want to eat more food, and that's totally normal. And there is a lot of scientific evidence that does suggest that in this particular phase of your cycle, your body needs about 200 calories extra a day. Now, 200 calories, don't go crazy. Don't go crazy in the aisles of the supermarket with the Cadbury's chocolate or anything. But 200 calories is still your body needing like a little bit of extra energy. So that's why you might find yourself more tempted to reach for those chocolate biscuits, the sweets and that sort of thing, because you're looking for that extra bit of energy. And if you are noticing that and you're recording that, you can get prepared, can't you? Because if you're looking to lead a healthier lifestyle and you know that at that time of the month you're going to want to potentially eat more food than you would normally, you can make sure that you've got good choices in the house for you. And it's just, again, it's like with this knowledge, if you know it, you know that these things are going to happen, then you can adapt and you can tweak your lifestyle accordingly. So I've just sort of spoken briefly about food there, but in terms of exercise, if you're feeling like tired, you're not necessarily going to want to go and do a HIIT class. And actually, at that point in your cycle where your body is potentially preparing for a pregnancy, the last thing you want to do is to actually stress it out and trigger your hormones to produce extra cortisol, because that actually is going to potentially encourage your body to retain weight rather than lose it. So it's quite important to think about these different changes in your cycle in terms of what you're eating, how you're exercising, but even what you're doing at work, and the things that you're doing at home with your children as well. If I'm planning days out with my daughter, I do not do them when I know I'm going to have my period, because I'm not going to be the high energy mum that I want to be. But if I want to take her on, like a day trip to the zoo or something, I'm going to make sure that I do that at the front end of my cycle where I've got more energy and I'm going to show up as a better version of me. And I put those movie dates at the time of the month that I know where I'm going to have the lower amount of energy. So that's the third phase. The final phase is your menstrual phase. Everybody knows what that part is. That's when you get your period. Periods look really different for many, many different women. They can vary in like intensity, in like the amount of time that you have your period, which is why we need to be recording this. And then when you know what is normal for you and what that looks like, then if it isn't the same and you have months where things start to change, that can be a real sign that potentially there's something else going on in your body. So that really is a whistle-stop tour to your cycle. There is an awful lot more to go into within that, but if you think about it in terms of the seasons, so your luteal, your menstrual phases, we talk about them being autumn and winter. Think about how you feel in autumn. How do you feel in winter? Like, you want to slow down, you want to be at home more, you want to get a bit more cozy, you want to rest and take it easy. It's a lot easier to get up in the morning and put your trainers on and go running in the summer. And that's what it's like for your body when it comes to those phases within your cycle as well.
Oh, that has been absolutely fascinating. I was honestly so excited to hear you talking about this stuff because I knew it was going to be so interesting, and it really is. And I love the picture of the seasons, because that does really help you picture what your body's going through and help support it accordingly. And I really thought what you said about noticing what is usual for you to be able to realise what's not normal, because that is really important in terms of like being careful about our health, to notice any differences or any changes that we can then get checked out. And then also obviously leading up to the menopause as well, to notice things that are not normal for us. And what you were saying about planning your month, that makes so much sense, to actually plan your work, your business, any big projects you got going on, family stuff, like planning the big busy things for when you know you're going to be feeling more energetic, more focused, and then planning times of rest and like give yourself full permission for that. And that's a really lovely way of doing it. And then you'll get the most from those productive times, and you'll also recuperate from the rest time. So it's so fascinating, isn't it, how our bodies work? And like we said about men, like I hadn't really thought about it like that before, like how men, like I knew they got an easier ride in a lot of ways, but imagine not having to deal with these ups and downs. Can you imagine how much more life?
And on the topic of men, I think it's really important, if you are in a good relationship with a good man, this is the kind of stuff that you need to be talking to them about as well, because there is this culture of, oh, you know, having a laugh about women that have PMT and, you know, who've got, oh yeah, she's got her period and that sort of thing. But actually, when I spoke to my other half about, you know, he didn't have a clue about women's health. He, you know, he didn't know, he didn't think he needed to know. And actually, when I sort of talked him through and he sort of started to understand, you know, what was going on with me, then it really helps them to support us. And if you live with a good man who really genuinely loves and cares for you, he's going to want to help you. And also, it's going to improve your relationship as a couple, because he's not going to be necessarily pestering you at the times of the month where you don't want to be pestered. And perhaps he's going to know that that's the time to come home with a bunch of flowers and a box of chocolates, or something, you know, that he can do that shows you that he loves you and he cares you and he's looking after you. And, you know, and they're going to have a better understanding of how we're feeling, and, you know, the fact that we don't feel the same every day. And when I showed Tim the diagram of our hormones, which, you know, is in kind of a lot of places, you can just sort of Google it. And he, you know, you could see these ups and downs and rises and things. And then if you look at a man's hormones, well, it's just constant. And he's like, well, it's no wonder, is it, that some days you've got more energy and some days you're more tired. And they don't get told this stuff. And I think it's really important that, you know, half of the population are dealing with it, and the majority of the other half of the population are probably living with somebody who is going through it, whether it's like their wife or their sister or their daughter. You know, it's something that everybody, I think, needs to be more aware of.
Definitely. These are such important conversations for us to have more compassion for ourselves, and for our partners to have more compassion for us, for our daughters to sort of change society's views towards it. And I think it is slowly changing. I hear a lot more about menopause in like the media now, which is great, that people like Davina McCall have been champions for that. And I heard her saying recently, like, there's just two things you should not joke about, is a woman's menstrual cycle and the menopause. Like, it used to be more acceptable to do that. And even my husband could have been guilty of that, been like, oh, I think, you know, you're due on or whatever. But now he's been really good. He's talked to me about it and said, just tell me where you are in your cycle. Tell me how you're feeling. And he's got a lot better. So that is hopeful, isn't it? It's hopeful that there is progress. But we have to advocate for ourselves, and we have to keep having these conversations, don't we? For ourselves, for our own sake, and for future generations. So that's been so good. Do you have any other tips, and you sort of mentioned about being more aware of our bodies, slowing down, resting, you know, preparing healthy snacks, which I think is a great point as well, like allowing ourselves to have that little bit extra, but making good choices, which I really agree with. But are there any other sort of well-being or lifestyle tips you could give us for just supporting our hormones in general, whether we're having a regular menstrual cycle or maybe approaching menopause?
There's so many. I think we've spoken quite a lot about fitness. So I think maybe the one that I'll sort of leave you with today is the fitness side of things. So if you have signed up to a gym, or you have got some sort of like workout streaming platform that you have at home, there are going to be some days where you want to press play and you want to show up to that high intensity class, and you're going to have the energy to do it. But my real key piece of advice is to listen to your body, because there are going to be times where your body's saying, that's not for me right now. And I think it's important that you hear that voice. And I am not, as a personal trainer, giving you permission to sit on the couch and eat Doritos all the time. What I'm saying to you is be honest and be, you know, truthful to yourself. Do I genuinely feel tired? Is it a point in my cycle where I'm likely to be feeling tired? Or am I at a point in my cycle where I should feel more energized, and perhaps I just need to maybe give myself a little bit of a kick up the butt today. And I think if you have that information when it comes to your fitness, you can make a better decision. Now, as a personal trainer, when I'm working with women, I use the principles of cycle syncing with them. And when we are doing workouts, they know that some weeks I am going to push them hard, and then other weeks I'm going to back off. And they love it, because that means to them that they're going to come to their sessions knowing that the workouts are going to be designed for where they are in their cycle. And there are days when they're going to be able to take their foot off the gas because their body's not going to be in the right place for it. And I think for so many of the women that I have worked with, that has been the major thing that has kept them on track with their health and their fitness. Because how many times do you give yourself a hard time because you don't feel like doing it, and then you quit? Because you're like, oh, well, I can't do it. I'm useless. I'm going to give up. But actually, if you have that knowledge and you know that time in your cycle, you're not going to want to do that HIIT class, and you can say, do you know what? That's okay. But come next week, I'm going to feel totally differently, and I'm going to show up and I'm going to give this 110%.
Yeah, I think that would be my big takeaway from our chat, is to just get to know yourself better, notice what you need, notice what your body's doing, and just be gentle on yourself, take care of yourself. But things like fitness and exercise are so good in supporting our well-being. It's definitely not an excuse not to do it, because I notice if I'm eating well, if I'm moving my body regularly, that my hormones are a lot more stable. I'll get less of the peaks and the troughs. I'll still get them, but they'll be gentler. So I think the more we can take care of ourselves and show up for ourselves and look after our nutrition and our movement and our well-being, then the better we'll be able to manage our hormones as well. So it all kind of works hand in hand, doesn't it? But Sarah, I'm sure people would love to find out more and follow you and dig into this topic more, because you have given us such a great overview of it. But like, there's so much more to find out. So please tell us how we can stay in touch. Like, obviously you've got your Fit Productive Mum podcast, which I would totally recommend people follow and check out. It's so good, so much good stuff in there. But how else can we stay in touch and carry on this conversation with you?
Well, honestly, I am going to say, as busy women, I am not going to encourage you to go down the social media rabbit hole, because that's actually something that I've put to one side myself recently, particularly Instagram. So come and find me on the podcast. Download the episode, pop your earbuds in and listen. Come and check it out when you're folding laundry or in the car with the kids. I do warn you in advance if it's something you might not want them to hear me talking about. But that's the place where I hang out. And then there's all the links to my websites and things like that are in the show notes of the podcast. But yeah, Fit Productive Mum. And I always say MUM because we're British and we spell it like that. But that's the place to come and find me. Thank you so much. And thank you. It's been such a lovely conversation. And I think it's incredible that you're such an advocate for women's health and well-being.
Oh, well, thank you. It's such a pleasure to have you on, and same right back at you. Like, I think the work you're doing is so important. So please do check out Sarah-Jane's fabulous podcast. And Sarah-Jane, you have to tell us before you go, you can't get away with it. You have to tell us what you would choose for your last meal on earth.
Chocolate. Anything chocolate. I would be like a massive chocolate fountain with some strawberries. That would be me. I'd be in it.
Just bathing in the chocolate. Love it.
Yeah.
Amazing. Oh, well, thank you so much for your time tonight. It's been fascinating. Thank you so much for listening today. I really hope you've had some inspiration to look after yourself, body, mind and soul, and feel as well as you deserve to do. Please remember to subscribe and share this podcast if it's been helpful for you. And I'll see you again soon with another episode and some more amazing guests. Take care.